You see, the next speaker is Maude Barlow from Canada. We are very happy that you have crossed the Atlantic Ocean to tell us about Canadian experiences and perspectives on CETA and TTIP. Now in Danish. Maude er forkvinde for The Council of Canadians, som sagt, en respekteret forbruger- og miljøorganisation i Canada. Hun er modtager af 12 æresdoktortitler og mange priser, blandt andet The Right Livelihood Award, som ofte omtales som alternativ Nobelpris. Hun har været seniorrådgiver om vand for formanden for FN's generalforsamling og var leder af FN-kampagnen for anerkendelse af vand som en menneskeret. Hun er også forfatter til dusinvis af rapporter og 17 bøger, heriblandt den seneste, som hedder Blue Future, Protecting Water, the People and the Planet Forever. Hun har i årtier været aktiv i kampen for fair trade-aftaler i Canada og rundt om i verden. En udbygget version af den tale, Maude vil holde, oversat til dansk, er omdelt til alle, som I har set på sæderne. Og arrangementet her er sådan, at nogle tolke løbende vil viske Maude i øret, hvad der foregår på dansk undervejs, sådan at hun kan følge med i det. Men der vil ikke blive oversat fra engelsk. Vi regner med, at dem, der møder frem her, godt kan forstå det engelske. Og jeg vil så lige nævne også, at Maude uddyber sine budskaber til os ved et møde i morgen eftermiddag kl. 17, Gamle Kongevej 33, hvis nogen har lyst til at høre mere, end vi når i dag. Titlen på hendes oplæg i dag er, og det er interessant, mener jeg, det er følgende: CETA, generalprøven på TTIP. Please, Maude, take the floor.
But it is a very great honor to be here today. Thank you, Steen. Thank you, Nana, for those wonderful opening words. It's a great honor to be here with former Prime Minister Rasmussen. I'm very honored to be in this lovely room with you all. I'm sorry I don't speak Danish. I will try not to speak too quickly. But I have so much to share with you. And forgive me, I was laughing at your glasses. I just had cataract surgery in one eye, and I'm trying to find how to see now. If anybody's had that, it changes everything. It's good in one eye and not in the other, but we're doing fine here. So I have a story to tell you about CETA and TTIP because Canada has lived with a free trade agreement longer than any other so-called developed country in the world. We signed the first free trade agreement back in 1989 when Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. So it was a bilateral agreement with the United States, and that became the North American Free Trade Agreement. And the North American Free Trade Agreement was the very first agreement that had this ISDS, this ability for corporations from one country to sue the government of another country. That was the very first time in it with the so-called industrialized or first world countries, and not go through their own government. In the past, they had to get their own government to lay a charge against another country. But now they have the right to come after us directly. So we've been living with this, and we have a story to tell you about what this means. So I guess the first thing I want to say is that most of you probably haven't been talking much about CETA. You've been talking about TTIP. And I've been saying they've been talking about that CETA negotiations have been going on now for 8 years. And most Europeans have just heard about it in the last 6 months. I've been here many times saying, but don't forget CETA. And suddenly everybody's saying, wait a minute, maybe we should be looking at CETA because TTIP, if it happens, and it may not happen, the anger about it is so fierce in Europe. And the feeling in the United States against trade deals like this is very strong. I don't think the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to be adopted. So what you need to do for now is forget TTIP and turn to CETA. Because CETA is TTIP. And this is the most important thing I want to say to you this morning. Post-NAFTA, our economies merged in Canada and the United States. And we basically are a branch plant economy. And all of the big corporations that you are worried about, that would use the regulatory cooperation or the investor-state agreements to come after you, all of those corporations are operating now in Canada, including companies like Monsanto, all the big chemical companies, all the big pharmaceutical companies, all the oil companies. They're already in Canada, and they're not box office. These are companies that are operating in Canada. There are almost, are you ready for this? 42,000 American corporations operating in that country. They don't need TTIP to come after the higher standards in Europe and the higher standards in your country, whether it's food safety, animal safety, chemicals. You will have much higher standards here on what you allow in terms of chemicals and so on. This is what you need to understand, is that these companies don't need TTIP. If they have CETA, it's just as good for them. So that's the most important thing I want to say to you this morning, because CETA, like TTIP, is the first agreement in the world that goes after subnational governments. And so this also includes provinces, states, and municipal governments that make decisions on local spending. So no longer are you going to be able to say your local tax money is going into local programs to promote local economic development and so on. Excuse me, in our country, in my province in Ontario, we had a Green Energy Act. The Green Energy Act said we're going to promote alternative energy sources. The government would subsidize moving away from fossil fuels to safer energy sources and give preferential treatment to Canadian companies so that it would be promoting economic development and alternative energy. Sounds pretty good. Not allowed to do it. That was struck down under the WTO. So this is the kind of thing that you're going to find these trade agreements like CETA and TTIP would go after. So CETA, just like TTIP, would put public services at risk. It would make it almost impossible if you privatized, for instance, your water services, and I know there's some early talk here now about opening up and commercializing your water. If that happens under CETA and TTIP, you can't go back. The causes called ratchet and standstill make it so that when you so-called liberalize or privatize or commercialize healthcare, parts of education, whatever, water, you are locked into the public system. CETA, like TTIP, contains regulatory cooperation. Now, all trade agreements have within them regulatory cooperation in the sense that you just eventually start to harmonize. But for the first time in these agreements, it's a formal process. And the formal process means that the private sector actually has a seat at the table. And if Monsanto wants to say, okay, we would like to begin negotiations to harmonize European and North American standards, for instance, on GMOs, that's the process through which they would do it. Now, maybe they wouldn't get everything they want, but you wouldn't get everything you want either. It's extremely important that you know that. And shockingly, under the harmonization of regulatory cooperation, any new law or any change to an existing law that your government or the European Union as a government wants to introduce would have to come to the Canadian trade experts first. Our Trade Department would have to say, well, we don't think that's good, that's not in the spirit. They would be able to be looked at by the private sector in Canada that would have a say in this before it even goes to your own legislature. And already Europe has weakened its fuel quality directive at request from our former government, who threatened to pull out of CETA if Europe said that our tar sands oil, which is among the dirtiest oil on earth, were not, if they were given a lower rating, which we were hoping would happen in Canada because we're trying to stop the growth of these tar sands. And as I said, CETA contains, like TTIP contains, this ISDS, this ability of corporations to sue governments. Now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what's happened in Canada. Sorry, this is just the airplane does this to me every time. We have had many, many challenges from American corporations. We've had 39 ISDS challenges against Canada. We've already lost 7 of them, but there's a whole bunch more pending. We have paid out millions of euros in damages already, and at the moment we are challenged with 1.75 billion euros worth of challenges from American corporations. Now, 2/3 of these, it's important for you to know, are about the environment. They're challenging Canadian environmental rules. We have a challenge against Quebec, which put a moratorium on fracking, shale gas fracking. You would think that would be our right to do this. An American energy company is challenging this. We have had bans on lawn pesticides challenged. We lost a fight when an American company challenged our ban on exporting PCBs because we said it was dangerous to people and water and the environment. And so it's very important that you understand that these agreements give corporations huge rights to challenge government laws, any new laws, or even an interpretation of a law that they don't like. And they have the right to challenge in a way that your domestic companies do not. If you bring in a new law, all the companies have to obey it, but you have to pay compensation to the foreign corporations protected by CETA or TTIP or NAFTA in our case, because you changed the rules and they're losing profit. Now you're going to hear from our government, my government, which is touting this, although we have a new government, unfortunately they're still promoting free trade, very much like Obama, President Obama. Our government is saying, okay, we listened to you on ISDS, so we've changed the system and we've got something new called the Investment Court System, the ICS. Don't buy that. It's no different from what they had. It's still going to be on an individual case-by-case hearing. It's not a real court where you have judges who sit. Some cases, a trade expert might be the judge, and the next case, that same trade expert might be working for the corporation. And in any case, it's very dangerous to set up a special court for foreign capital, for foreign corporations, and to say that those corporations have more rights than your people do, than any organizations or sector or even your own companies. It's a very dangerous world to say that we're going to officially set up a court that gives preferential treatment to foreign capital. When you think of the companies that we're dealing with, many of them are bigger, they have bigger GDP than many countries. We're talking about massive corporations that have huge power. And a new report found that this court system would have allowed most of the ISDS challenges launched in NAFTA. And by the way, it's important for you to know the American government has never lost one ISDS challenge under NAFTA. Canada's lost a whole bunch. Mexico's lost a whole bunch. For some reason, the big guy on the block is always coming up okay. So it's very important for you to know that CETA is TTIP, but I also want to say, and I know I have only a few more minutes, all right, I also want to say to you that CETA and Canada is kind of important and dangerous in itself. You need to understand, if you have an image of this wonderful Canada, this is how my government is promoting it, we share European values and we very much have high standards and so on. This is not true anymore. Particularly after the last 10 years of the Harper government, our environmental laws are decimated. All the laws protecting water are gone. If any government, the new government tries to bring them back, by the way, they could face challenges, ISDS challenges from American companies operating in Canada because they lower the standards, and if they put them back up, then it's going to cost these companies more money. We also, and this is very important for you to know, when we harmonized from NAFTA, we harmonized our food systems, the way we grow food, the way we produce agriculture. We harmonized it to the American system. And we moved from being a mixed agricultural economy, much more growing food for ourselves, to an export economy, large chemical-laden corporate farms, very much a factory farm operation. You need to know that Canada is the third largest producer of GMOs, genetically modified foods in the world. and we do not have mandatory labeling. We've tried for many years to get mandatory labeling. No government will touch it because of the power of these corporations. And so we are promoting and producing food that many people in Europe do not want to eat. But you can bet that our government is going to fight back, and the American companies through CETA will fight back against any attempt to maintain your higher standards. Just give you a few examples on chemicals and pesticides. Canada considers ractopamine, which is a growth stimulant for animals. It's banned in Europe. It's considered fine in Canada. Atrazine, which is a herbicide for corn, is considered fine in Canada. It's banned in Europe. Glyphosate, which is very controversial here and not wanted in most countries, it's fine in Canada. Neonicotinoids, which we know are killing the bees, fine in Canada. This is all considered safe by the government. It's banned here. You can know that these corporations are going to use CETA to try to push down the standards so that we have common standards. And we have lived through this. With NAFTA, we have changed our standards. We dropped our higher standards on chemicals, on the energy and the way we produce food. And so I really want to share this story with you because I think when people hear about trade agreements, they think it's about opening up markets. But really these new trade agreements, particularly CETA and TTIP, are not about taking tariffs down or trading goods. They're about getting at services. They're about getting at non-tariff barriers like regulations and standards. They're about bringing it down to the lowest common standard because these companies don't want to bump into higher standards as they move across political borders. And they will work relentlessly to bring those standards down to the lowest common denominator. So what can we do? Well, we're fighting hard in our country. I have to be honest with you that when people in our country think about a bad trade agreement, first they think NAFTA, then they're thinking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because that's dealing with countries with many low-wage, low environmental standards, and so many people in our country are saying that's the most dangerous. Many people in our country are saying, well, Europe's wonderful and they've got higher standards and maybe CETA will help us move back up to our higher standards. And I keep saying it doesn't work like that. It's not about the people. It's not about coming together to find those higher standards. It's about what happened to us under NAFTA. We had higher social standards. We had higher environmental standards. We had higher standards on chemicals and the way we produced our energy. We used to have an energy board that looked at our energy, our oil and gas, and said, what's good for Canada and what's good for the environment. Now, it's North American energy and we have absolutely no control over it. It's just been turned over to the private sector. We have no energy policy except to sell it as fast as we can. And now we're selling that terrible tar sands bitumen, which is why Canada, no matter what we say, when we say we're going to meet our international goals on climate change, we can't because we keep expanding this operation that is creating so many greenhouse gases. So I'm here to plead with you to tell you that we are a country that's gone through a very negative experience with trade. And we, different governments tend to come along and say, well, perhaps this one's different. And they're not different. These agreements are not written for people. I'm not against trade at all. In fact, my country is a trading country. First thing we traded was beavers for beaver hats in Europe. That was the first trade. We are a trading nation, but we have to come to a different system in our world. And I'm just going to end with this. These trade agreements and these investment agreements are like the framework over economic globalization. And we've been told for 30 years, maybe 35 years, that giving corporations more power, freeing the market, freeing the financial institutions, privatizing and letting the market make decisions, all of this is going to be really good for the world. Well, I'd like to ask the people who promote this, how are you feeling? How's it going for you? Did you read the report from the United Nations that 3/4 of the world's population, working age population, are called the precariat, do not have decent jobs, do not have any kind of job security? How can that be? Have you read, do you know about the discrepancy between classes now, the new class reality within all of our countries? My country, in the first 10 years of NAFTA, we had the highest growth in child poverty in the industrialized world. It just went, we never had street people. We never had people begging on the streets. I'm telling you, we didn't. We were like a big egg with a big middle class and a small group of rich and a small group of poor. And now we're like a big pear with fewer and fewer holding more and more power and money at the top and more of us falling out at the bottom. That's how we look now. We took away so many of the social security measures that protected our people. So I'm telling you this because we have lived this, and it's not good for the world, and we cannot continue to take down more forests and to take down more wetlands and to increase corporate farming around the world and to put the stress on water. And if I start talking about water, you'll have to get a sheep hook and get me out of here. But I just will say this, we are a planet running out of clean water. This I know. This is the area that I spend my life working on now. And we are a planet in deep distress. We have polluted and over-extracted our rivers, lakes, and groundwater to the extent that by 2030, something like over half the population of the world is going to be living with water stress. It is the largest killer of children in the world, more than all forms of violence put together. These are the issues we need to be dealing with. How to protect our natural world. How to protect justice. I'm not afraid of the word protectionism, and I'm not talking about being against trade, but we have to create trade agreements that protect these fundamental rights, because when they're gone, they're really hard to get back. And you are looking at a Canadian who has lived through profound change in my country, and I don't want that negative, profound change for you. So I beg us to come up with an alternative. Another trade system is possible. It's not, we don't have to build in this corporate power. We can make a difference. And I believe with all my heart that we can do this if we do it together. And that's why I'm here today. I'm not home with my grandkids because I miss them every moment. I'm here because we need to build these alliances together and to say together we can build a very different trade system, a different way of producing energy, a different way of growing food, a different way of trading across borders, based on justice, based on sustainability, and based on the rights of the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Maude, for a very inspiring talk. That was great. Now we will invite our three politicians to come up and take the floor here and start with some questions to Maude. That in order to keep time and so on, and to have a general debate with everybody involved at the end of the conference, there is only one question in this conference, and you will come to the table again and again throughout the conference, but starting now with a question, each of you, to Maude. So please, Jen, you are the first.
As you told us, environmental standards and standards of consumer production are worse in Canada than in Europe, which means that standards in Europe. As you told us, environmental standards and standards of consumer production are worse in Canada than in Europe, which means that standards in Europe on environmental issues and consumer protection is better than in Canada. So isolated, from an isolated point of view, this should be good then for Canada to have the CETA and bad for Europe, or how should I understand it?
Thank you. Then Peter.
Yes, thank you, and also thank you for a very interesting presentation. First of all, I'd just like to say that I agree with you on the criticism of the ISDS mechanism, and I also agree with you about your painting of how economic anxiety is plaguing the whole of the Western world, actually. What I wanted to ask you, and it's also it's a big question, also a bit challenging, a very dismal view that you gave of the CETA. Do you see any positive elements in the agreement at the table right now? Just any at all?
Thank you very much for a very inspiring talk. What I'd like to ask you is if you could elaborate a little bit more about the problems that we can possibly face with US corporations suing using the ISDS or ICS as it is called nowadays to sue European countries through the CETA agreement. As I'm aware, that was actually what happened with Australia or Philip Morris, that Philip Morris actually used the trade agreement with Hong Kong to sue, that Australia had with Hong Kong to sue Australia for labeling cigarette packages. But I think that is crucial in the debate because there's a growing fear of TTIP, but little debate about CETA. So could you please elaborate?
Okay, wonderful questions. On the first question, if Europe has higher standards in Canada, isn't CETA good for Canada? That's the argument that we're fighting at home because people make that assumption. Well, if we lowered our standards under NAFTA, wouldn't it be better to have an agreement with Europe? But the issue, of course, is not moving to a higher standard, it's always moving to the lower standard. This is what we're learning, particularly about ISDS. It's always used to challenge higher standards, and they incessantly move things down. The concerns that we have in Canada actually are that we have actually a better patent regime for our drugs, our brand drugs. Our generics can come to the market 2 years earlier than yours. So we're going to make a negative change and adopt yours, and that means that drug prices in Canada are going to go up quite dramatically. So that's a real huge issue for us. The other big issue for us is the two biggest water companies, Veolia and Suez, and also Nestle, which the water division is headquartered in France. All these big water companies are European, and they're all very keen on CETA because they want to get Canada's water. We have water. Not as much as you think. I just wrote a book on Canada's water crisis, as a matter of fact, because we're not taking care of our water because we've dropped all our laws. But so we're very worried that we're going to be forced to continue privatizing our water, that we're fighting Nestle in a community quite near me, as a matter of fact. Nestle is expanding its operations anywhere where there's water. So from our point of view, it's the European corporations, the drug companies and the water companies that are going to lower are going to threaten those areas. So if anything in Canada, those are the issues that we're dealing with. But I take the heart of your question to be, could we not use trade agreements to bring us to a common higher standard? And I would say yes. But that leads me to the second question, which is there anything good in CETA? Honestly, I have to say no. I am not against trade. But this is such a fundamentally flawed agreement, as is TTIP. It's based on what's good. It's based on what's good for large transnational capital. It's what's good for investors. And they don't mean the little, specialty shop or the person who makes this wonderful cheese, or these wonderful little dolls or whatever. People think, oh, I'll have a expanded market for my small business. No, you won't. What will happen is if you've got a good product that anybody's interested in, one of the big companies is going to come up, gobble you up, and these are the winners. In fact, there's a very recent, very important study that showed that the big winners in these ISDS cases, because it's not just in NAFTA, there are now well over 3,000 bilateral ISDS agreements in the world. And so companies, if they're upset about the way they've been treated in a country, they'll look for another country that has a bilateral agreement, and they'll set up a subsidiary and they sue them from a different country. And a recent study found that not only do the corporations win way more often than the countries win in these cases, but the biggest corporations, the ones that are worth billions of dollars, are the real winners because they have the deep pockets to afford the lawyers and the marketing people. It takes a lot of money to fight these court cases, and it takes a lot of money for a government to defend itself. Even if the government in the end wins, which technically Australia did, I read that it cost Australia $50 million to defend its right to have plain cigarette packaging. I mean, this is not a decision that should be made in a court that some corporation can use. If your people say, we want you to put your cigarettes in plain packaging, this is a decision that we should be able to make as a democracy. This has got nothing to do with trade. And I really want to emphasize, this is not about trade. This is about regulations and standards and what's good for big business. Finally, though, on the problems, the question around companies suing under CETA or under TTIP, but same thing, I just want you to remember, CETA is TTIP, 42,000 American companies. What would they go after? Well, they'll go after the same things they went after here. You get Canadian mining companies, they're already operating in Greece and Romania. They are meeting opposition in those countries. We have the worst, I don't mean to putting my country down, but I'm just telling you honestly, Canada has very lax laws about mining, the mining industry. So many mining companies are registered in Canada. Actually, 75% of all the mining companies in the world are registered in Canada. And a recent industry study that was leaked said that Canada's mining industry has the worst environmental and human rights record in the world. These companies want CETA and other agreements like it so that when they meet opposition in Greece or Romania or anywhere else in Europe, they've got this agreement to say, your government, the former government gave us a contract and you have to let us expand, and if you're not happy with it, we're just going to take you to this international or this European court. So our mining companies will use it. You'll find American agribusiness will use it. Companies like Monsanto, which have been absolutely brutal in our country. They went after a farmer named Christy Schmeiser, and it was understood that their GMO crop blew onto his farm in Saskatchewan, but they took him to court because he wasn't paying royalty for the corn that blew, the GMO corn that blew onto his property. They're really, they're tough. They have big standards at stake, and so they do not like, and they have said outright, and this is documented, that they want to use TTIP, and so CETA is the same thing, to open up Europe's opposition to GMOs. And you're going to find that's another one. You're going to find that they're going to go after the higher chemical standards, and last year the European Union did not name 13 chemicals that they were going to ban or put a partial ban on in respect to the upcoming TTIP. They backed off. So we already have evidence that these agreements have already lowered standards in Europe. And I'll just tell you the last one that you need to know about. This is a case that was just this unbelievable. It was an American pulp and paper company called Abitibi-Goldwater that was operating in one of our provinces, Newfoundland. If you ever come to Canada, go to Newfoundland. It's a wonderful island off Canada. It was its own country till 1949, and it's still its own country. They have a wonderful Irish, Scottish accent, and they're lovely people. They had a huge, Abitibi-Goldwater for decades had a big pulp and paper operation there, and so they had access to the water, right? Because you need water for pulp and paper. 5 years ago they left. They went so-called bankrupt, and then they turned around and reformed under another name and didn't pay their debts, but they left hundreds and hundreds of jobs and no pensions. They said, sorry, we're bankrupt, we can't pay pensions. Then they turned around and they said to the government of Newfoundland, you owe us money for the water rights we left behind. And the government of Newfoundland said, what are that's our water, you get to use it when you're creating jobs here. You left, go away. So they went to NAFTA, and they made a NAFTA Chapter 11 challenge, and we ended up paying this company $131 million for the water rights that they left behind. So this is a very new frontier, because it's not only challenging regulations that they don't like, but these are now companies saying we actually own the water that we're using. So think about a company that's setting up all of the land grabs and water grabs in Africa, for instance. There's an area 3 times the size of Great Britain that has been taken up by foreign agribusiness. And they're pumping the groundwater as fast as they can. I mean, they're just producing massive amounts of food from groundwater. Using an agreement like this, they can clearly say, we own that water. And in fact, they're building into some of these agreements now unlimited or 99-year access to as much water as these companies want. So we're crossing a new frontier here, where there's not just governments being challenged, but the actual ownership. One could see this for forests or minerals. If it's so for water, it could be for any natural resource. So that we're shifting the ownership of these public resources from the public, governed by managed by our governments in public trust, over to the private sector. And that is a new frontier which really worries me, and I think should worry us all. And I would invite you, the report that you have on your seat is a report that I wrote about the Canadian experience with NAFTA, and it's been translated, and I thank you so much for that. Please go to our website, Canadians.org. You can get it there, or you can get it through Steen. It's really important that we share this information with one another. We can say no to this CETA, we can say no to TTIP, and we can tell our legislators, go back to the beginning and come back with a better agreement. We're not against trade, come back with something that is more just and fair, and to that we will say yes. Thank you so much.